If you don't know me, I'm Katie, like Dan said, and if you've listened to the podcast, Freely Given, you're already acclimated to my ridiculous accent and my proclivity for laughter. The laughter is sometimes an echo of felt joy, sometimes it's a result of nerves, or falling back on my default Midwest setting of smile and laugh. And don't get me wrong, I have a good, hearty amount of joy in my life, but those helpings of joy are not divvied out to me as some compensation. No matter how hard I chase joy, I can't catch it, I can't pin it down, I can't make it mine, and I can't create it. Joy is something we are given, and when we encounter it, it's often a surprise. Joy is a gift rooted in the work of Christ for us. I understand I can't catch it, spark it, or create it, but that doesn't keep me from trying. As a kid, I would have called joy floating in a lake or being on my grandparents' farm, especially for sleepovers. And perhaps as a child, I had a better understanding of joy. I knew it was something given to me, and I didn't question the gift, I just took it. Looking back on those days, the joy I have in the memories is probably feels more like nostalgia than joy. And at some point, I was given an equation that so many of us are to create joy or achieve joy. In the equation, joy is so easy to attain, as long as you keep all the letters in the right order. Put the J for Jesus first, the O for others next, and finally, you put yourself last. And joy will be in the palm of your hand. How many of you heard that acronym before? Yeah, right? A lot of us have been to Sunday school. As a teen, something I tried to figure out and what it looked like was, what does it even look like to put Jesus first? All I knew was that I wasn't very good at it. And I certainly had no idea who I was supposed to put in front of myself because I wasn't going to put everybody in front of myself. I found plenty of substitutes for joy. But as C.S. Lewis tells us in Surprised by Joy, those things are not joy. They are simply pleasures, and pleasure is always at our fingertips. Pleasure is something we can chase and pin down and make ours. As I mature, I'm less into chasing pleasure just because I'm tired the next day. It's too much work. But my desire to chase and create joy hasn't ceased. Now it's just put into the work I do. Now I chase joy in all my vocations, and especially in being a mom. I convince myself that my life will be rainbows and sunshine if I can just simply keep my ducks in a row. I convince myself that being a certain way or doing certain things will create joy for me, my husband, and my kids. Regardless of the stage of life I've been in, the overall theme when it comes to joy is, I want to do it all by myself. I don't want to be surprised by it. I want the control and the credit, and at the bare minimum, I want to anticipate it. A few Valentine's days ago, my daughter gave me a picture of what I look like when I'm attempting to create and control joy. And she knows I tell this story. Now she thinks it's funny that I tell it. But she attempted to create joy by making homemade Valentines, putting together the dollar store Valentines, and converting an Amazon box into what looked like a disco ball because of how much glitter she had encrusted on this thing. And I vividly remember looking out my kitchen window, putting shoes on my youngest, and I see her manhandling all of her joy. The Minnesota February weather is in full force, and the snow is coming sideways. Like where we live, it's not a snow globe snow, it's sideways snow. Her hands were like clenching on the top and the bottom of all of her created joy, and from past experience, I knew exactly what she was about to attempt, and I knew the ending. She was going to attempt to unclap her hand from the top and open the door fast enough and outrun the wind, attempting to get all of her joy-sparking creations into the pickup before the wind can rob her of it all. All of her work scattered on the snow-crusted ground. And of course, by the time I got out there, she is my daughter, so she was a ball of tears. Convinced her whole life was ruined, convinced she and her class would exist completely void of joy and pleasure for the rest of their days. We gathered all the still usable, still damp pieces of paper, and the Valentine's box did have glitter on it still. There was enough. Off of the ground, I looked into her eyes and reassured her that I was going to go get a bag and we'd put all of her treasures in. With much authority, she informed me she would not be using a bag. Can you hear the Minnesota accent? I rolled my eyes and I grabbed her a bag. On the long 2-block ride to school, through tears and amid her catching her breath, she made the same plea over and over, "I'm not using a bag." I couldn't bring her into school like this, and there was no way she was going to get those creations into school without a bag. We made a few laps around the school in an effort to calm her nerves, and at this point, I was so thankful we lived in a small town, because if we lived in a city, they probably would have called the authorities, as many laps as we had made. While we made our laps, she insisted over and over again she was not going to use a bag. Her tone indicated that it was obvious why using a bag was a ridiculous idea. I'm sure my tone made it clear that she was actually the ridiculous one. Finally, she gave her reasoning. "I can't use a bag, Mom. If I use a bag, people will know I'm weak and not able to carry it all." Yeah, come on, she's stubborn, that's what it is. You don't have to feel bad for her. I'm certain my face did nothing to hide my perplexed inner monologue. Why in heaven's name would you believe you could carry that all on your own? She did eventually relinquish power. Obviously, I'm here to tell the tale. We put all the pieces of joy she created for others in the Aldi bag, and she headed into school with tear-streaked cheeks and snow-stained valentines. I thought about this scenario on that long 2-block ride home. And I could not fathom why she believed she could do it all on her own, or why she thought she was the center of this whole scenario. It seemed unfathomable until I took an inventory of my own life and all the ways I've attempted to chase, spark, and create joy in my life and in the life of others. I don't look all that different from my daughter, chasing around Valentine's in a blizzard or sitting in the backseat of a pickup crying, convinced I've ruined everything amid my attempt to do everything. I've chased what I thought was joy in a very stereotypical way in my 20s. I've tried to be the producer of joy in many of my vocations. I've tried to follow formulas to make joy mine. But the chasing, the producing, the formula following have always ended in failure. Yet, my life has not been void of joy. Instead, I've been surprised by it. Lewis was also surprised by joy, and perhaps you have been too. Here's what Lewis says, and he kind of defines joy here. He says, "It is that of an unsatisfied desire, which is itself more desirable than any other satisfaction. I call it joy, which is here a technical term, and must be sharply distinguished both from happiness and from pleasure. Joy, in my sense, has indeed one characteristic and one only in common with them: the fact that anyone who has experienced it will want it again. Apart from that, and considering only in its equality, it might almost equally well be called a particular kind of unhappiness or grief. But then, it is a kind we want. I doubt whether anyone who has ever tasted it would ever, if both were in his power, exchange it for all the pleasures in the world. But then joy is never in our power, and pleasure often is." C.S. Lewis, surprised by joy. So what does Lewis say about joy? This is what stuck out to me. It's not happiness, It's not pleasure. It's not in our control. It's an unsatisfied desire. It is entangled with grief in ways that are difficult to understand and articulate. It is a gift given to us. Creating a succinct definition of this elusive thing called joy is out of my realm of abilities. The best way I know to talk about joy and other mysteries of life is through story. It seems story can give us a glimpse to answers to questions where answers are elusive and definitions lengthy. The account of Sarah's laughter gives us a picture of what it is, what it looks like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like. Explaining things through story leaves rooms for nuance and interpretations, which it's frustrating, right? When we want a solid 5-word definition. But story can also communicate the richness of things and of life. I've heard all kinds of commentary on Sarah's laughter. People say that after a quick Google search, this is what I discovered. Podcasts, organizations, tips and tricks about how to laugh more, articles on fertility, and the list goes on and on. I've heard people call Sarah's laughter an outward expression of her lack of faith, and I've heard people call it a show of her faith. I've heard it talked about in terms of the joys of being a mother. And perhaps we can add to that list and say, Sarah's laughter is a picture of joy in the life of someone awaiting a promise. Sarah's laughter is the sound of someone living in a broken and fruitless body and world, at the same time awaiting promise and laughter amid the pain. Sarah's laughter, and perhaps ours too, is the sound of joy given to us, created for us. The sound of joy entangled with sorrow, the sorrow we experience in a broken world. Here's what Genesis says about Sarah and her laughter. They said to her, "Where is Sarah your wife?" And he said, "She's in the tent." The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "Am I worn out, and my Lord is old? Shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I shall return to you, about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "No, but you did laugh." Sarah understood the ridiculousness of her womb producing a child. She had chased the pleasure of having a child. She had chased it with such veracity that she gave her husband to her Egyptian servant girl. It says, "Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar, and so said to Abram, 'The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her.'" Sarah's plan to achieve motherhood through her Egyptian slave and build a family did produce a child, but the circumstance was void of promise and joy for her, the child, the slave woman, and I'm quite certain Abraham and everyone around. Joy came to Sarah in her laughter and through motherhood, but the joy was not created by Sarah, nor was the vocation of motherhood the source of joy. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears this will laugh with me." And she added, "Who would have said to Abraham and Sarah, would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Barren and fruitless Sarah was given joy. She watched the promises made to her and to Abraham, and all the nations grow in her womb. She didn't create it. Laughter was given to her. It was provided by the Lord, as her husband testifies in this epic foreshadowing of God the Father providing his own son for us. It says, Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. Don't want to screw that up. That's a key part. Her joy came to her through childbirth, as it did to every man, woman, and child, to the barren and to those who multiply. Generation after generation awaited the arrival of God in flesh, given to us through the pain and joy of childbirth. Pure joy entered humanity through the womb of a woman, through the entanglement of the joy and sorrow known as childbirth. In our brokenness and fruitlessness, we are given joy, laughter, and provision for yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Sarah's pain, sadness, and thorns in her side were not removed the moment she delivered her son and held him in her arms. Yet, there was laughter, there was joy. The pain of having children does not end with delivery. Although my husband will attest that as soon as I have the baby and we have him in our arms, I quickly forget what it took to get there and that my stomach revolted for 9 months. That's why we have 4 kids. So, pain and joy have been entangled with one another since God confronted the serpent, Eve, and Adam, and gave the promise of joy to Adam and Eve. As the familiar passage from Genesis 3 says, the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all the livestock and above all the beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. To the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. And to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Our vocation as husband and wives, our relationships with our neighbors, the work we do, will never be our source of joy, but will be the source of pain and struggle. Yet, entangled in all that, there is joy. There's joy because Christ is for us. We will sweat and struggle and fight, and yet there will be joy among all the pain and sweat and struggle because of the work of Christ for us, given to those around us through our vocations and given to us by the vocations of those called to serve us. And as I mentioned earlier, I am a lot like my daughter. I need to take a drink for quick here. Sorry. I am really good at chasing joy around. In my 20s, it was more like I was chasing endorphin hits, and sometimes I still am. It's just the way endorphins are stimulated is different now. Before I was a mother and before I was a wife, I'm glad you identified with that. I had a really beautiful picture. It was gorgeous of the type of wife I was going to be. It looked a little like the equation I'd been given for joy. It looked a little bit like a Better Homes and Garden cover, and I figured I would look like something off of a Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. At the root of all of those idealistic and delusional images was me. I was going to be the creator and distributor of all the good things. The idealistic picture I created came crashing down when I was clutching a positive pregnancy test on the bathroom floor of my first apartment. The baby I was expecting all those years ago now towers over me. And I love him dearly, but I can assure you he is not the creator nor the originator of joy. I tell people, yeah, he's very 14. The entanglement of joy and sorrow and happiness and pain are illustrated minute to minute in the life of a teenager, maybe second to second. But really, truly, joy abounds. It's just not rooted in my role as mother or, thankfully, in his role as teenage boy. Surprisingly, it has nothing to do with who I am and what I do. I was surprised by joy 13 years ago when it threw me into the depths of an ugly cry during premarital counseling led by my childhood pastor. 13 years ago, I was elated that the pastor who had baptized and confirmed me had agreed to officiate our wedding. I was so happy he was doing this, and so was my grandma. I also knew his stance on premarital, should we call it knowing? Keep it clean, keep it biblical. And the joy-filled excitement was entangled with nerves of being confronted by the sorrow of my lackings. I racked my brain for information he had given us about the vocation of wives in those confirmation classes I sat in years before. I knew we had talked about it, but I didn't remember much. As I attempted to remember, I started creating a list. My list had less to do with what I had learned in confirmation and more to do with the picture of witted bliss I had created with me at the center, sprinkling joy on those around me. Sitting in Morris, Minnesota in the church office where pastor was serving as vacancy pastor years after he retired, because isn't that the trend right now? I gave him a list of the ways I was going to redeem myself. I gave him this plan for redemption and creating joy that really, it was a good picture. It was filled with sorrow and delusion also. He let me give my prescriptive TED Talk, looked at me and simply said, "Katie, you do know you're forgiven. And if you don't, hear me now, you are forgiven." So cue the ugly tears. Not as bad today as it was then. There is no greater joy than what those tears expressed. There is no greater joy than hearing you are forgiven. After years of ministry, this man's ears were tuned to hear a confession that sounded more like a prescription to make my own joy. He knew from years of service and probably through his own life and his own vocations that they are entangled with sorrow and joy. He also knew that there would be no joy for me or anyone in my path if I was turning my marriage and motherhood into some sort of self-salvation project or heated pursuit of joy. That day, I remember going through value cards and pastor giving my soon-to-be husband a hard time about his Presbyterian background. The gift that keeps on giving, however, the thing I look back on over and over again, is the absolution I was given. The absolution that I didn't even recognize I needed. The absolution that shaped my motherhood, vocation of wife, and everything else my hands have touched. The beginnings of motherhood for me held sorrow and hurt, but they also held joy. And that entanglement is still true today. Unfortunately, the absolution did not turn me into a perfect mother. You can ask all 4 of my kids, not just the oldest. Not even a better mother. It didn't turn me into a better homes and garden homemaker or a mother with unending patience or a wife that looks like a Sports Illustrated model. That's the one I'm most disappointed about. What it did was turn my eyes off of myself and onto the work of Christ. It restored joy. What absolution does is remind us of the work of Christ. What absolution does is give a hope for this world we live in that is entangled in joy and sorrow. What absolution does is let us see the sorrow we create and at the same time, the joy we have because of the work of Christ. Absolution gives us the freedom we need to live in a broken world, awaiting a promise entangled in sorrow and joy. In absolution, we are handed the goods, the work of Christ for us on our account. The sweet words of forgiveness sustain us in this entanglement, in this world of almost, not yet, already that we live in. A few Advent seasons ago, I was looking for a song for me and my daughter to sing in church, and I came across this gem that I play a lot during Advent and Christmas, and it's called Mary Consoles Eve. I'm obsessed with the image. I have it on my arm, tattooed on my arm, so I'm committed. And this song about Mary and Eve, Mary is consoling Eve with the best thing we have to console one another. In the world entangled with joy and sorrow, the song doesn't give a light answer. The sorrow of this world are looked at head on. Yet, joy is the highlight of Mary's message. So the song goes like this. Eve, my sister, the one who took the fall. Eve, my sister, mother of us all. Lift up your head, don't hide your blushing face. The promised one is finally on his way. And then it ends with, Eve, my sister, the one who took the fall. Eve, my sister, mother of us all. The promised one is finally on his way. Almost, not yet, already is repeated over and over again. Almost, not yet, already, soon. And I feel like that describes the world that we live in. Almost, not yet, already. We know the promised one has come. He has done the work, yet there's still more to come. In the almost, we get these fleeting glimpses of joy. In the image of Mary and Eve is depicted as still clinging to Eve, yet the bringer of brokenness is crushed. It is the tears of joy after we hear the sweet words of you are forgiven. We live in the not yet. We experience brokenness each and every day. At times, joy is impossible to see, hear, feel, and know. Laughter seems like an almost forgotten sound. We are acutely aware of our nakedness, shame, and sorrow, and we wait. We already live in the already. The work has been completed. Joy is ours on account of the work of Christ. We are consoled by looking to the work of Christ. In this almost, not yet, already, we are surprised by joy. The entanglement of sorrow and joy is no more apparent than on the cross. There is no denying the agony Christ experienced on the cross, yet for us, it brings joy. We find joy in the exchange that took place there. All of our brokenness was placed on him, and he gave us his perfect righteousness. Each and every piece of our lives is an entanglement of sorrow and joy that is inseparable. While we chase the pieces of our lives around, after trying to hold it all together in the pursuit of giving joy, we are confronted with sorrow and surprised by joy. While we create prescriptions for the ideal life filled with pleasure, we are nearly crushed by sorrow and surprised by joy. While we hear the promise and fixate on the brokenness, we are surprised by joy. In the almost, not yet, already, we look to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith and our joy. Entangled in joy and sorrow, we are protected by our untamed God. So I'm going to read a quote from Rod, and hopefully I get through it, because we look forward to leaping like a calf. And this comes from his talks for those broken by the church. And this is what I'll leave you with today. Christian failures are going to walk into heaven, be welcomed into heaven, leap into heaven like a calf leaping out of its stall, laughing and laughing, as if it's all too good to be true. It isn't just that we failures will get in, it's the fact that we probably will get in like that. We failures in living the Christian life as described in the Bible will probably say something like, "You mean it was that simple? Just Christ's cross and blood, just his righteousness imputed to my account, as if mine? You gotta be kidding." And all for, my handwriting's bad. And all of heaven is ours just because of what was done by Jesus outside of me on the cross. Not because of what Christ did in me and my heart and my Christian living and my behavior. Well, I'll be damned. But of course, Rod said it, so I figured I could. But of course, that's the point, isn't it? As a believer in Jesus, as your substitute, you won't be damned. No believer in Jesus will be, not a single one. And as C.S. Lewis puts it, there are going to be a lot of surprises. There is no greater joy than hearing, on account of Christ, you are forgiven.